This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit BetterHelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warm up from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you as we're going to go a little bit more SEC-centric today as our good friend Blake Lovell. He does great work over at Southeastern 16. He's going to be joining me in a minute or two. We're going to take a look at how things have gone in the conference here in the offseason. We saw a few coaching moves over at Texas and Texas A&M, so a little bit of a progress report there. We're going to be chatting with him about some of the guys that are going to be entering into the conference, just how we see some of these teams being able to really be able to elevate for this upcoming season as well, and just the landscape of college basketball, some of these guys fishing around for eligibility and all the strangeness that we've been seeing on that front. And then in the final segment, did get quite a bit of college basketball news on Saturday, so we're going to recap that for you. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_81. Keep in mind, the naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And today, everything is brought to you by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they make sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365, because unlike many places where they run on credit and things like this is just an account that you're able to utilize every single moment of every single day for all of your gambling transactions. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, you're able to get a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. That's edgeboost.bet, promo code Greg. Now let's dive into it. Blake Lovell, he does such an amazing job over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He, much like myself, covers this all 12 months out of the year. I know that he is very dedicated to what we're going to be getting this upcoming season out there in the SEC, and he was along for the ride every step of the way with regards to the historic season that we saw out there in the SEC last season. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, it has been a very rambunctious offseason as I refreshed, and we are seeing north of 2,540 players in the transfer portal. And just what do you make out of this offseason? Because I do think that NIL and everything like that is a good thing for these players. I do think that what we were doing previous to the last few seasons was very much a disservice to these guys. And at the same time, I think that we've gone too far and it's become the Wild Wild West. And somehow, some way, we need to get a little bit more control over what has been a very unmitigated and uncontrolled situation.
Yeah, no doubt. We knew this was going to be the trajectory, I think, each year is that you're just going to have these numbers kind of continue to climb. And I think it's just the nature of, again, kind of the expectation of what a player is going to get at a certain school. And, I mean, how many times have we seen this now already in this offseason where it's, one guy goes somewhere and then, hey, all of a sudden there's a better situation, a better offer that comes in, and hey, he's off to the next place if we're even playing for the team that he had just transferred to. And so that's just, I think, just the nature of, again, where we are right now. And every team, it used to be one of those, I feel like early on, it was like, well, you can sort of opt into the transfer portal if you wanted to. You didn't have to, but you could opt in if you want to. Well, now it's like nobody's opted in or out. Like everybody's in. And if you're not, you're going to get left behind because you just know that this is how it works, especially, when you certainly look at these power conference teams and you look at all these players that are getting multiple type, big deal offers all across the board. And of course, it also applies to the mid-major, low majors where good luck trying to keep your players whenever you're seeing some of these guys just continue to get, kind of money put on the table that you just simply can't match. So it's kind of, I think, all the way around. Sure. I mean, it's just kind of a situation where you really can't predict anymore where some of these players are going to wind up, no matter how good they are, because really it's just a matter of what does that NIL look like? What does that offer look like? And that's what it comes down to.
And I'm so glad that you do mention that, because I do think that while we're taking a look at all these guys in the transfer portal, while we're taking a look at all these moves in general, what we should be emphasizing in these teams that are going to be bringing back a lot of their guys, that how much you want to be looking at that more so than the transfer portal, because I think that's bigger news at this point when a guy doesn't enter in the transfer portal rather than when a guy does, because again, you just do the simple math, 2,500 guys in the transfer portal, some of these guys actually did graduate and are out of eligibility. There are more guys currently in the transfer portal than are not in the transfer portal.
It's continuity. When we look at some of the teams that, obviously for me covering the SEC, more so than any other conference, like, look at the teams that had success last year. How did Florida? Look at the makeup of some of those guys on the team. They had been together for multiple years, so you have a little more continuity. Look at the guys that Auburn bring back last year. I mean, that was one of the reasons why they had so much success, is because you had guys that had been there, and certainly it helps having a Deni Broom and all that, but still at the same time, like, it's sort of when you can have your guys in place that already know the system, they're already acclimated to what the coach likes, yes, you can kind of stay ahead and just keep building off of that. And, that's the important thing where, it's so hard every year to be in a position to do that now, because you just expect, maybe close to half your roster or more to be potentially heading somewhere else. And so it's not the norm anymore. And that's why we look at all these rosters and just try to figure out, how's this whole thing going to play out? I mean, I remember back in the day, we're talking, well, Kentucky's that team you're always identifying and saying, well, Kentucky's got a new roster. How's everything going to gel together? They were one of the teams that we could just maybe count on one hand. We're like, all right, they're going to be one of those we have to watch that because there's so many new players. Well, now every year, everybody is just kind of in the same situation. And so, yeah, the teams that can keep the most players, and you kind of build them within that system, we can see how it can pay off when you look at some of these teams from this past season.
No question about it, and it is so interesting to take a look at in this day and age. It's joining me on the show. We do have Blake Lovell, who does such tremendous work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And how much do you think that it's going to be behoove some of these teams to be able to try to bring in these transfers for multiple years? Because I thought that was the biggest thing that stood out to me this season, because you mentioned it with Auburn. Even though Deni Broom did not begin his career over at Auburn, he spent multiple years there. He was a guy that transferred in and he stayed for quite a while. Florida had quite a few guys like Walter Clayton and company that they transferred in, but at the same time, they saved for multiple years. And I think that that's a big thing in this day and age, not just being able to get 1 year rentals via the transfer portal, but getting guys that are going to save for 2 to 3 years, which I fully recognize is easier said than done, but that does feel like it's become the blueprint for a lot of these teams that have made big NCAA tournament runs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's just a matter of knowing that, it's kind of that double-edged sword where it's like, okay, you get a guy that transfers in, he plays well for you. He's one of your top players. You know just how it works now, where that asking price probably goes up, right? And I can tell you there have certainly been situations like that in the SEC this season, where you've had guys who emerged this past year and were in a position where, they're sitting there kind of in a spot where, all right, they did well. And all of a sudden, everybody else sees that. And so now can that team that had them on the roster be able to match whatever else is out there? And I can tell you there have been probably a handful of situations, if not more, in the SEC where that's happened, where it's like, hey, guy would love to come back, but you know what? He all of a sudden, became a bigger star, or, is one of the bigger stars in the league. And then boom, like, hey, there are going to be other people out there saying, well, you know what? We can top that. We can match, we can do better, and all those things. And that, like we said at the beginning, is just really where we're at right now. And so, that's the thing. If you're able to keep these guys, it's going to come at a cost. But you know what? Sometimes it's just a matter of, there are certain guys, as we know, Greg, not everyone's motivated by the financial side of this thing. But when you do open it up in this sort of scenario, it's not going to be surprising if that drives a lot of this, which we know, still, it's not everyone, but it is.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things where if you're working a regular 9 to 5 job, if one company is going to pay you $50,000, one company is going to pay you $100,000, even though you might not like that company as much as it's going to pay you $100,000, let's call it what it is. It's hard to turn down double the money. So I'm right there with you. And just in terms of the SEC right now, have there been any teams that you've really identified that they are going to be running it back a little bit more than a lot of these other teams? Because I do think that it is so interesting to look at this landscape of college basketball, because there's very few teams I look at and I feel like they have a good core. Purdue really comes to mind. Houston, those are teams that are outside the SEC. But have there been any teams within the conference that you've identified that you think, man, even though they might not be bringing back like 100% of their minutes, because nobody's going to be, they actually have a relatively good base and they don't need to get like 17 players via the transfer portal to be solid this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly when you look at Florida, right? I mean, just the fact that they're going to bring back pretty much the entire nucleus of their front court. I mean, that is just a jarring thing for a national championship team, right? And so thinking about the possibility of them bringing back their four main guys there, I think that is obviously could be very significant. Now, we know they lose some guys from the backcourt that they've already kind of been able to replace in terms of some of those positions. But I think you have to start, to me, with Florida in terms of just bringing back the nucleus that really propelled them to the national championship. We all know how good the guards were, Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin, Will Richard and those guys. But when you think about, Thomas Houck, Alex Condon, Chenyolu, Han Logden, potential of having all those guys maybe back in the mix, I just think that is about as good as it gets out there. Maybe not just in the SEC, but nationally, when you can start that. And of course, knowing, picking up a Xavier Lee and guys like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think Florida's obviously in a really good position to start off the season, in that top 15, top 10-ish probably range. And then you look at some of the other SEC teams in terms of kind of bringing back some of their key players. Missouri, just getting Mark Mitchell back, I think is significant. You've got some other guys, whether it's Robinson and some of the guys who were on the roster last year. That's going to be big for them, because I don't know that they've made the biggest splash, in the transfer portal, maybe compared to some of these other teams. But I still think that's where, okay, you've got some guys coming back that you feel pretty good about. Also, I think Texas, to me, Greg, is a team that I really have my eye on. They have done some good work, obviously, under Sean Miller so far in the transfer portal, but bringing back potentially that trio of Jordan Pope, Kendall Weaver, like Tremont Mark, like I think that is a great starting point for a team that really feels like, with the additions they've made in the front court, I think Texas is a team we're going to go into next season and say, if people are sleeping on them, they shouldn't be, because the new coach, I think the roster looks really good right now with some of the additions they've made. But again, going back to kind of the nucleus that they're going to bring back, especially at the guard position, I think that's significant. And the other team I would mention is Vanderbilt, because I think they're another one, just like last year, maybe was not getting enough love. But if they are in a situation where, let's say they bring back, a McLaughlin, Tyler Nickel, Tyler Tanner, those guys, and you look at the additions that Mark Byington has made, whether it is looking at the potential of a Frankie Collins, Mike James, Jalen Washington, all of those guys, I think, Vanderbilt is in a position where I put them ahead of several SEC teams right now, just based on kind of the returning group they're going to have. And they still have a couple more spots. Certainly they need to fill, but it's not everyone, even you can look at teams like Alabama, right? Like they've got a couple guys that are going to come back that'll play a big role. But I think overall, from that standpoint, and maybe I should have mentioned Arkansas too, because, if you have those two guys are going to be sophomores now, and Billy Richmond and Carter Knox, if they both come back, DJ Wagner, Brazil, all those guys, I think Arkansas will be there right in terms of being the possible front runner as the SEC favorite maybe heading into next season. So you've got quite a few teams that are in a good position, it feels like, just by bringing back some of the guys that were on last year's roster.
I totally agree with you, and we're always in a good position on this podcast when we do have Blake Lovell aboard. He does great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I do think that it's interesting to take a look at those two teams with a new coach as well, because you mentioned with Texas, you're really keeping your eye on them, I think very rightfully. So you bring back a guy in Sean Miller, who he'd still be at Arizona most likely right now if it wasn't for the fact that DeAndre Ayton made $100,000, which you look at it in this day and age and you sort of laugh. It's like, wow, DeAndre Ayton only got $100,000. He'd be getting a whole heck of a lot more if he would have been born like 5 or 6 years later, but that's what was going down in college basketball in that day and age. And then Bucky McMillan over at Texas A&M, I think, is so intriguing as well. How do you take a look at the two? I mean, for not even just rosters of those teams, but the styles as well, because we know that with Xavier last season under Sean Miller, they were always a very up-tempo team. And with Bucky McMillan, he plays a style of basketball that the SEC, I just don't think has ever really seen before.
Yeah, it is going to be different. And I think if you do start with the Aggies, I mean, certainly you talk about a big change from what we had with Buzz Williams, where it seemed like our conversations all the time about Texas A&M were, man, they're going to defend you, but good luck trying to figure out what they're going to shoot from a percentage-wise anywhere on the floor, not just in one area, like literally anywhere. And so it's going to be much different now, because we know they're going to try to build in a different way. They're going to play a much different way. And I think it's going to be interesting just to see how he fills this roster out. He had another SEC to SEC transfer, picking up Duke Miles, which I thought was a significant addition as well. So, Mbako joins from Indiana. So I think that's another one where you're looking at the potential of what he can do on this roster. But I think overall, it may be a year of progress. Like he may need to make a little bit of progress this year and then wait till next year, maybe really see how it comes together, because they did get a little bit of a late start just with the coaching change and trying to fill out the roster when a lot of these other teams seem to just be, from a numbers standpoint, a little bit further ahead. But I tell you, with Texas, I really am very high on what Sean Miller has done with this roster so far, whether it's picking up Swain, whether it's picking up Vokatitis, like all those guys. I mean, even Traore from Long Beach State, like I think he's someone, obviously was out with the injury, but I like my Big West basketball, Greg. Like he was a beast out there for Long Beach State a couple of seasons ago, as we know, when Dan Munson was still the coach there. And so I just think when you really are looking at kind of the outlook for these two teams, obviously I think the expectations are going to be much different, because I think for A&M, it's really setting the tone, seeing how this style sort of acclimates into the SEC, while knowing that you probably will get your first full roster maybe next season. But I think Texas, the expectations should be much higher right off the bat for Sean Miller, because I think he's got a team. Not saying maybe they're going to compete for the SEC title necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking up, come January, conference play starting, and saying, hey, there's that team that you may want to keep an eye on when it comes to that top part of the SEC standings.
No question about it. And I do think that they're going to be a lot of fun to be taking a look at. And when it comes to the transfer portal and what we're all seeing out there in the SEC, I think the biggest intriguing question mark that I have right now is regarding one specific team, and that'd be Tennessee, because as we know, in Tennessee, Zakai Ziegler used up all of his eligibility, but I think that he could be one of those guys that tries to come back for like his 500th year or something like that, because we're seeing these guys that use up 5 full years of eligibility still enter in the transfer portal. So that's been interesting to say the least. But with Tennessee, over the last 2 years, the way that they've been able to get over the hump, the way that they've been able to get to the Elite Eight is bringing in that one dominant scorer, whether that be Dalton Connect 2 seasons ago, whether that be Chaz Lanier this past year. Do you think that Tennessee might be looking for that same approach this season? And if they don't, how do you foresee this Tennessee roster playing out? Because I think that that's really the big question mark, and I think that they could be the biggest team that has the most to gain/lose here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tennessee is one player away from me maybe putting them at the top of the SEC in the preseason right now when you look at their roster. But if they don't get that player, maybe you move him a couple slots down, because, Rodney Rice was the big one. It seemed like it was down to either him going to Tennessee or going to Villanova. And what happens? Well, the Muss Bus comes driving in and he heads to USC to join them. So that was a little bit of a surprise for some people. And I think for Tennessee, they had obviously aimed pretty high to try to get him. I mentioned Duke Miles earlier. It seemed like he may be in, a possibility there as well. And so what they're really needing right now, when you look at their roster, is a 2-guard. Now, I've seen some stuff out there about Jordan Gainey, maybe. I don't know how that works from a, eligibility standpoint and all that. I haven't, as you said, Greg, sometimes these things can be a little confusing. I forget how many years certain guys have played and all that stuff. But these are just things where, for Tennessee, when you consider they picked up Jacoby Gillespie from Maryland, obviously Jalen Carey, I think from Vanderbilt, I think he's going to do really well. If you're getting Okpara back, the front court looks fantastic right now for Tennessee. You mentioned picking up Nate Ament. I mean, that is a top freshman who is likely going to be a top 5 draft pick, next season. He's going to come in and just be someone they're going to lean on right away. They've already got pretty much the foundation there. They just need a little bit more depth, I think, at the guard position, knowing all those guys they had to replace with Ziegler and Lanier and such. And like I said, it seems like some of those options I mentioned could play out, and we'll see which one does. But if they were to shore up that, which I would assume they will over the next couple of weeks, I do think you're looking at Tennessee being one of the favorites heading into it next season, because to me, that's kind of that missing piece right now to see what they're going to do in that spot. But overall, I mean, for me, it's probably, when you're looking at this group, Greg, and we had this discussion the other day, my colleague Max Barr and I just trying to figure out, okay, obviously it's early, but if you're trying to group these teams together, who are you grouping in there at the top of the SEC? To me, Tennessee has to be in there with teams like Florida and Kentucky, who I think probably is the biggest winner of the transfer portal in the SEC. I just think Mark Pope did a really good job building that roster, and it's pretty much set at this point. And then, of course, you've got teams like Auburn, Arkansas, Alabama, who I think are also going to be right in the mix there when it comes to those preseason top 20 type level teams, it seems.
And if you're asking about the eligibility of Jordan Gainey, he did play 4 years, but his first year was in 2021-22, so he didn't get that COVID year, which means he probably still has about 15 years of eligibility remaining with the way that things are going this year in college basketball. If you're under the age of 40 and your name is not Van Wilder, you're still probably able to go out there. But that said, we shall see what is going to be happening on that front. And I know you, Blake, you're trying to parse through it all. Whether you've got 1 or 500 years of eligibility remaining, that is CBD, but feels like everyone has eligibility right now, and you're eligible to always give out great insights. You're always eligible for this podcast, and we appreciate it when you take me up on that offer as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find all of our SEC basketball coverage over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Of course, still doing pretty much almost daily type stuff, looking at all these transfers in and out of the SEC, and really just kind of on a national level, how it's affecting other teams out there. So yeah, you can check us out there, Southeastern 16 on YouTube, and everything else college basketball related. You can follow me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake does such an incredible job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball every single time he joins me on such great insights. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It was great to be joined by Blake Lovell, who does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to our good friend Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that you saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. I just have to throw this in there for giggles. This guy was a pretty highly touted recruit coming out of the junior college ranks a few seasons ago. Did not play at all last season, but he is looking to resurface at the Division I level. Always right. His first name is always. His last name is right. He's going to UT Rio Grande Valley. When he last appeared for Rhode Island, was not a great shooter. Only gave you about 2.5 points per contest. Did throw in there 2 assists per game, so might be able to give you a little bit of facilitation. Again, really did not get out there on the floor last season, but the fact that you've got a guy by the name of Always Right who's going to be heading to UT Rio Grande Valley, the Vaqueros, I think that that's a win in my book, so we have to have a little bit of good, clean family fun there. And for UT Rio Grande Valley, they and so many teams out there in the Southland have begun to break out the checkbook a little bit more themselves, be able to add a little bit more NIL into this collective as well. So we will see what moves they make moving forward, but you know what, that's a fun one, and you do like to be able to see that, and you do like to see this as well. Davon Barnes, he was over at UTEP last season, and he was solid for them. He was able to give the team a seal and a half per contest. They're in their 10 points per game. If I'm not mistaken, I think they began his career at Tarleton State as well, but he has decided that he is going to be going to Ball State. Ball State, a team that really does like their good three-point shooters. And for Barnes, I'm not going to say that he's like a guy that's going to completely go out there and light it up for you, but he did shoot about 34.5% from three last season. 2 seasons ago at Tarleton State, shot 39.5% from three with 13 points per contest. This should be a good fit for them. That should be able to give them a little bit more defense moving forward as well. So I really do like what he's able to bring to the table. Joel Armitrain, he was over at UC Riverside this last season, and he was rock solid down low for them. About 5.5 to 6 points per contest, but they're in their 6.5 boards, a little bit over a block per contest. He is going to be adding on over to Nevada, and I think that this is a good fit for Nevada, a team that was a little bit lackluster down low, aside from Noah Davidson in the post. So they are a team that I think is going to be able to elevate a little bit more with that regard. For Nevada, obviously things went a little bit downward for them when they lost so many of those good backcourt pieces from the team that led them to the NCAA tournament 2 seasons ago. And for Nevada, I have to think that they are not quite done here in the transfer portal quite yet, because they have made a minimal amount of moves, because they bring in Tayshaun Comer and Elijah Price. I have to figure that there's going to be a few more moves to be made, but I do think that that's a good place to be able to start. For Oral Roberts, I think that this is rock solid for them as well. Yatu Yamanachi Williams, he last season was over at Portland, where he was averaging about 8.5 points per contest. I remember that he began his career out there in the Southland as well. It's just been really off and on injured over the last few seasons, but at 6'10", he does have the propensity propensity to pop it from three. Not a guy that's going to be like absolutely lighting it up from three-point range or anything like that. But that said, I do think that bringing in a guy like a Yamanachi Williams, that is going to be able to do a good job of being able to help this team out. And for Oral Roberts, they just need a little bit of size in general. So this is going to be able to help them out. And I do think that that is a really good pickup for them. I think that this is a good pickup for Delaware State as well. Miles Webb, he last season was over at St. Francis, Pennsylvania. 6'8" big man, was able to give the team right around about 4 points, 3 rebounds per contest. He's heading on over to Delaware State. Delaware State is going to be missing quite a few of the pieces that made them so successful last season. For Delaware State, it's been a up and down sort of roller coaster for them the last few seasons in college basketball. They've been much more competitive here recently. I give a lot of credit where it is due to the coaching staff, as Sam Waterman has been able to do a great job with this program. Last year, they were able to get above 500, but when you are missing so many of these guys that were so rock solid from a season ago, that does lead to a little bit of strife. This team was one of the better low post teams out there in the MEAC, and this should allow them to be able to stay on top with that regard. So I do think that that's a pretty rock solid pickup. You've got Marlon Barnes Jr. going on over from Pittsburgh on over to Evansville, a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player then. Was a redshirt guy this last season. I don't think that he's going to be a guy that's necessarily going to be able to go in there and maybe make the world's biggest impact, because his three-point shooting does still leave a little bit of something to be desired. But this was someone that, coming out of high school, there was a little bit of fanfare around him, and he did come from the great state of Ohio, so he's very used to the Midwest. This is a former top 300 recruit. I do think that he's going to be able to get some relatively solid minutes for an Evansville team that they're making shrewd moves in the transfer portal. This is not a bunch that has a whole bunch of NIL to burn. This is not going to be one of those teams that is going to be getting your blue chip 5-star guys or anything like that. Evansville has had to be very crafty under Coach Ragland and company, and they've been really doing a nice job of being able to find some of these diamonds in the rough, going to the NAIA levels, finding some of these guys like in this example where you've got a highly touted guy coming out of high school, but just want to able to see the floor in general. They've already got A.J. Casey coming in from St. Louis. Now they've also got Kashawn Porter, a double-figure scorer from NC Central as well. So I like the way that they're filling out their backcourt. Probably going to need a little bit more down low, but all in all, I do like the way that things are coming together for them. I do like the way that things are starting to come together for Butler as well. Juantre Ore, he was very rock solid 2 seasons ago when he was over at UC Santa Barbara. Last season, he was seeing some good minutes for SMU, about 6 points, 3 rebounds per contest. Not a guy that's going to give you the versatility to light you up from three-point range. We'll see if that comes along for the ride a little bit more, but I said he's going on over to a Butler team that, it's called what it is. They just did not have a lot down low in general last season. He should be able to upgrade that position for them at Butler. They've done a good job of being able to add some pieces. Michael Ajayi, who was really good over at Pepperdine 2 seasons ago, just didn't necessarily have his world's best performance over at Gonzaga last year. He comes in. Yami Butler was a relatively good shooter over at Drexel. He comes in. Jalen Jackson from Purdue Fort Wayne is coming in. Drayton Jones, a 6'10" big man from South Carolina State, he's coming in. It's a well-rounded team. Now, who's going to be that go-to scorer, I think, is a little bit of a question mark. Are you going to have Jackson really be trusted with the ball in big-time minutes? I'm not quite sure, but what I do know is that this team is looking a whole heck of a lot better than they did last season, so I do think that Thad Matta going to finally start to be able to get things a little bit more online for this team, and things should be able to get online for UAB as well. They've always been online, but that said, even more online with being able to bring in a guy in Kyron Lindsey, who I still remember when he walked away from Georgia a few seasons ago as a freshman. He was actually their top rebounder at the time. This past season, just didn't find his footing over at Murray State. 6.5 points, gave you about 4.5 rebounds per game. He's capable of giving you about a block or so per contest, but I think that this is a really good buy low spot on a guy that I think is going to be able to help them on the glass in general, be able to help grab those second and third chances. When you lose a guy like a Yaxel Lennyborg, you certainly are going to be able to need that, but that said, this is a coaching staff that they know what the heck they're doing under Andy Kennedy. They're also bringing in Jacob Meyer, a solid scorer over at DePaul. Chance Westerly is a nice upside guy that comes on over from Syracuse as well, so I do like the way that UAB has been able to operate in general. I do think that there's going to be quite a bit of upside there as well, and I do think that there's going to be quite a bit of upside with this pickup as well, as you do have yourself a guy in Amari Marshall who has decided that he's going to be going on over to St. Bonaventure. So congratulations to him on now playing 40 minutes a game, as last season for Marshall over at Albany, 14 points, 2.5 assists, a steal and a half per contest. So the Bonnies, they're going to be able to get a nice ad here. He was a guy that was able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range. For St. Bonaventure, they always like these well-rounded players. He's able to stuff the statue. Again, Dr. Schmidt, for the love of Pete, you can go with more than 5 guys in your rotation. And for St. Bonaventure, because they did lose darn near everyone from a season ago, it is going to be a fresh rotation for them. But for St. Bonaventure. I do think that that's a pretty solid add. This very much fits the system in which they play. Now the question is, what else are you going to add around them? Because they still do have a few other guys that they're going to need to add in the transfer portal in order to, have any sort of a rotation whatsoever. They're also bringing in Frank Mitchell from Minnesota. I think that that's a solid add. Daryl Simmons from Gardner-Webb could give you a little bit at the point guard spot. Braden Jackson coming in for Buffalo. I don't know what he's going to be able to provide you. He's going to be on the bench. But that said, I do think that things are on the up and up there. You've got Andrew King, who he was a king over at Elon this past season. Was able to give out about 3.5 assists per game. Didn't really give you a lot of scoring. He only gave you about 5 points per game. Was not a great 3-point shooter, but that said, he's heading out over to a Youngstown State team that they've been forming a little bit of a new identity. They've been a much more defense-oriented team over the last 12 or so months. Ever since you had the coaching change come in, they've been able to be really a lockdown defensive team. Not necessarily a team that's going to give you a lot from the outside, though, so we'll see if they are able to add any of those shooters here in the transfer portal, but I do like this from a perspective of being able to dole out the ball, being able to give you some good defense along the perimeter, as they've also got Vladimir Saldirizde, who's coming over from UT Martin. He'll give you a little bit of versatility. Bryson Dawkins, he's coming over from Houston Christian as well, so I do think that they're doing a nice job of being able to fill out their roster again. Would like to see a little bit more three-point shooting, but all in all, I look at things, I do think that there's some upside there. For UTEP, even though they did lose Savon Barnes on Saturday, they also did pick up Tyrese Watson. He last season was over at Louisiana Monroe. Very well-rounded player. He was able to give the team a little bit over 4 assists, 12 points, 1.7 steals per contest. Guy that shot in the low to mid-30s from three-point throughout his career over at Louisiana Monroe. And Louisiana Monroe, they needed someone to run the point for them because they really didn't have a lot of options. But I do think that he's going to be able to fit this UTEP style in that he's got very good active hands along the perimeter. He should be able to generate a few turnovers. And for UTEP, the question becomes, where else are you going to be going from here? Because you do need a few other guys to be able to fill out this roster. I think that this was like the first main guy that they picked up in the transfer portal. So I've gotten a little bit of a slow start there, but I do like the fact that they bring in this man, and I do think that he's going to be able to help elevate them moving forward. And I think that this guy is going to be able to help elevate as well. As you've got Seydou Traore. He was over at Iowa this last season. Solid player for them at about 6'7". Not a guy that's going to give you a whole bunch of 3-point shooting or anything like that, but 6 points, 3 rebounds per game last season over at Iowa. Previously, he was over at Manhattan, where he was able to give the team more like 12 points, 8 boards. He has decided that he's going to Utah. Utah is a team that is very much built around low post play. Obviously, we're going to see a coaching regime change for them this season, but the fact that they're going to be able to stay with that identity that they've had last few seasons of being able to own the boards is something that you do like to see, because you just check out what Utah has done here in the transfer portal. They have added quite a few big men. They've got Keanu Dawes, who comes back after he had explored the transfer portal. James Okonkwo comes on over from Akron. Ja'Kai Howard is a 6'6", a little bit of a versatile player, and Terrence Brown is a guy that was a very good scorer at the lower level over at Fairleigh Dickinson. So I do think that this team is very well-rounded as of right now, and I do like what I'm seeing there. You've got Noah Ammenhauser, who is a 7'2" big man that began his career over at Grand Canyon. Couldn't see minutes there last season over at Coastal Carolina. Finally got those minutes, 11 points, 6 boards. He's able to give you a block plus per contest. He's decided that he's going to be going to Oregon State. For Oregon State, they're looking to duplicate what they did last season. They're not going to get the same versatility out of him that they did, say, Michael Ratal, for example, but that's it for Oregon State. With having a bit more size last season, they were able to really be able to ascend. Probably their best season ever since they made the Elite Eight. They pick up along Stephen Olawani, who was over at Southern Indiana this past season as well. Have yet to really hit the portal in terms of guard play, but they brought in a few rock-solid forwards, and I do think that that's a good place to be able to start. Christian Coleman, he's going to be heading on over to Oklahoma State. Solid get for Oklahoma State. I don't think that this guy is going to be like a super-duper elevator or anything like that. At 6'8" last season over at UAB, a steal, 11.5 points, 7 rebounds per contest. Not someone that's really going to stretch the defense, going to be able to light it up from 3, but Oklahoma State was very lacking on the defensive side of things. They were lacking a little bit down low as well. This should be able to help check off a few of those boxes, and I do think that that is going to be a good get for them moving forward, and I do think that this is going to be a very solid get as well. Iowa State, they're going to be adding Dominic Nelson. Now, do I think that Dominic Nelson is going to be uplifting Iowa State and is going to be seeing 40 minutes per game or anything like that? No, but for Iowa State, they should be bringing back much of that backcourt from a season ago. And if you need Nelson to be able to spell some minutes, be able to give you a little bit of depth, because we did see Iowa State get banged up towards the back half of the season last year with that Keshawn Gilbert injury. He was Mr. Nelson, able to give you about 14.5 points, 5 boards, shot right around about like 30 or so percent from three-point range. That was not his forte, but he was a very rough and tumble defender. Iowa State, they are built around really good defense. I think that this is a really nice culture add for them. I think that this is a nice add as well. Don't look now, but Lindenwood is adding some guys. This is Mekhi Cooper. He was last year over at Miami of Ohio, was able to give the team about 6 points, 2.5 assists, a little bit over a steal per contest, shot 38% from three-point range. He's going to Lindenwood, and that's what was really lacking for Lindenwood last year. They were an absolutely terrible three-point shooting team, and they were terrible at guarding the perimeter as well. They actually had a little bit in terms of being able to hit the boards, what have you, but for Lindenwood, they've done a nice job here in the portal. They're bringing in Dontrez Williams. He should be able to elevate the fact that this team is looking to be able to generate some turnovers. He was like Christian last season. Jadis Jones was a double-figure scorer. He entered in the portal from Lindenwood, but he's decided that he's going to be going back to Lindenwood. A good last 72 or so hours for this team, and in a school that was very much struggling first few seasons, coming up from the D2 ranks down to the D1 level, this has been very good for them. You've got a solid player in Joshua Mayo, who last season he was over at Coastal Carolina, averaging about 2.5 assists, 8.5 points per contest, not a great three-point shooter, but he's able to give you a bit of versatility. He has decided that he is going to be going to Winthrop. For Winthrop, they need to get a little bit more free throw shooting, for one, because they actually led all of college basketball last year in terms of free throw attempts per game, and yet they shot less than 67% at the free throw line. That was a little bit less than savory. And for Mio, I do think that he's going to be able to help out a little bit with that regard. For Mr. Mio last season, when he was over at Coastal Carolina, shot 73% at the free throw line, about 32% from three. I do think that him being added to this backcourt is going to be able to help them out quite a bit, so I do like that add. And then you had Damani Harrison, he was over at Southern Indiana this last season, and he was a good three-point shooter. He shot north of 41% from three-point range, registered about 15 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. He's decided that he's going to be going to Charlotte. Now, for Charlotte, one of the more slow and controlled styles in all of college basketball last season, and for Charlotte, they honestly played some bad defense. Harrison, I don't think is going to be able to help you out too much with that regard, but it's a Charlotte team that's going to be looking to turn over a little bit of a new leaf. They're also bringing in Ethan Butler, a 6'6", do-it-all sort of player that began his career over at Oregon, was over at Northern Illinois this last season. Kalal Mading down low, who comes on over from Norfolk State. He should be able to give you a little bit of rough and tumble down low. So I do like the way that the pieces are starting to come together. Again, we're going to need to see it all in practice in general, but so far so good there. And then you had Jason Rivera-Torres, who began his career over at Vanderbilt last season. He just didn't do a lot for the Dons of San Francisco. He only averaged 2.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. Honestly, he put up better numbers over at Vanderbilt, but that said, he has decided that he is going to be transferring on over to Monmouth. Very clear that the system was just not a fit for him last season, and we're going to see what Monmouth is able to do, because when Monmouth has been at their best, they've had that like 120 point per game scorer. Kavion McClain coming on over from Texas Southern. He should be able to be a nice microwave scorer. He was able to average 13 plus points per contest over at Texas Southern 8 seasons ago, but for Monmouth, I think that's a little bit of a jury's out situation. I do want to see how they're going to be able to just surround McClain with a little bit of talent in general if he's able to become that go-to scorer, but I do like what they're doing over there, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside on that front. I do think that there's a little bit of upside here as well as Nana Owusu-Anane. He was originally going to be going to SMU. He played previously at Brown 2 seasons ago, 14.5 points, 9 rebounds per game. Missed the entirety of this last season due to injury, but he is now going to Grand Canyon. They lost out Duke Brennan in the offseason. Grand Canyon has been one of the best rebounding teams in all of college basketball. I think that this is a really good add for them. I think that this is a guy that immediately, right away, is able to fill a need for them. I think that he's going to be able to fit in with that system. I think that this is a really, really good, rock-solid get for them as well. And then I do think that this is a little bit of an upside get for Kent State as well. Rayvon Griffith, he was over at Cincinnati last season, and with Griffith, he averaged less than 3 points per contest, just did not see a lot of minutes in general when he was over at Cincinnati, but he's decided that he is going to be going to Kent State, and Kent State has done a really good job of being able to find some of these guys that were highly touted, but just didn't see a lot of minutes for Griffith. As a matter of fact, according to 247 Sports, he was the number 64 recruit in the class of, I believe, 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So they're going to be rolling the dice on a little bit of upside at 6'6". He should be able to give this team a little bit more three-point shooting than they had a season ago. Pretty rock-solid defender as well. So I like what he's able to bring to the table, and I do think that this is going to be very interesting to see as well. Messiah Gilliard, who was over at Manhattan this last season, about 11 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. He has decided that he's going to be going to Temple. We give our forward to Lane Kiffin, go Owls. And for Temple, they have been very busy here in the portal over the last 72 or so hours. It does feel like Adam Fisher has realized that, yeah, we need to get a little bit more defense than what we've had over the last few seasons, as they've also brought in Jabari Felt, who was over at Bowling Green this last season. Gavin Griffith is a little bit of an upside, former top 150 recruit that comes on over from Nebraska as well. Manhattan's Gilliard was a guy that was able to put up numbers, but wasn't necessarily at the, shall we say, world's highest level of basketball. They're trying to bring in a little bit of everything, and I think that they're doing a good job of checking those boxes. You've got Anthony Arrington, who was over at Wofford this last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to Mount St. Mary's. He was able to average last season about 4 points per contest, and for the Mount, I do think that this is a pretty solid ad for them. They've done a nice job being able to gamble on some of these guys over the last few seasons. That they were like solid but not necessarily amazing at the previous stop. With Arrington, this is a little bit more of a one-trick pony sort of guy, not necessarily the world's greatest defender, as Wofford in general it's just never been a great defensive team. But 2 seasons ago, he was able to shoot about 40% from three-point range. Last season, we saw a little bit of a drop-off there. If they're able to get the guy that we saw 2 seasons ago, I think that this is going to be really good. And for Mount St. Mary's, one of the biggest things for the team is just being able to protect the ball. That was one of their biggest kryptonites last season. But that said, I do think that this is going to be a move that really helps out that offense. So I do like that move. And then you saw Caleb Middleton. He last season was over at New Hampshire. He was able to give the team about 3.5 rebounds per game. He saw a lot of minutes because, well, New Hampshire was all sorts of banged up. That's not even funny. And for Elon, they were really able to elevate this past season because they finally were able to get something in the post. They decided to bring in Matthew Von Komen. Now, I don't think that Middleton is going to have quite that sort of an impact, but as a 6'11" body that's going to help out an Elon team that lost, I'm going to call it here, darn near everything in the transfer portal this past season. So I do think that this is a solid way to be able to get a little bit of that talent back. Now, Elon has got a lot of moves to be made in the transfer portal because they just haven't necessarily been able to bring in a ton of guys thus far. This is either move number 1 or move number 2 for them, as I believe that they also are going to be bringing in a guy, Bryson Cockley, who was over at George Mason this past season as well. But I do think that that's a step in the right direction, and hopefully we're able to get you in the right direction for getting prepared for the 2025-26 college basketball season. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_D1. Keep in mind, Larry CM, they does not matter, so per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you like here on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks to Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16 for joining me in the last segment. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regularly season and on. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.